Reading and Northern Steam. In this video, we return to this beautiful regional railroad to see a Reading Ramble doubleheader pulled by the railroad's newly rebuilt 2102 and their venerable 425. We see the train as it makes its way from Reading to Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania, through the beautiful Pennsylvania scenery. We also get to see the railroad's beautiful F units as they pull the Lehigh Gorge Scenic train. Then, to finish the video off, we then chase the railroad's SD-50s as they finish the excursion between Port Clinton and Reading, Pennsylvania. Now let's go on with this doubleheader ramble. The date is August 13th, 2022. What we just saw was Reading and Northern 425 and 2102 backing down the main line past the Hart's Concrete and Supply Facility in Hamburg, Pennsylvania. We have returned to the Reading, Blue Mountain and Northern Railroad to see a special Iron Horse Ramble, a doubleheader between the railroad's newly rebuilt Northern and their reliable Pacific. Just like on the other rambles, today's excursion will depart Reading from the RNN's outer station and make its way north to Jim Thorpe, with a stop in Port Clinton, Pennsylvania. The next place we saw the power move was at the Main Street Railroad crossing in Mooresville, Pennsylvania. Here, right next to the railroad crossing, is a set of the railroad's new tricolor light signals, which provide a great scene for the two engines to pass through. After seeing the power move here, we then moved to the north end of the Reading and Northern's Reading Yard at the Tuckerton Road overpass in Reading, Pennsylvania. Here, the power for the railroad's freight trains and the power for the yard is based here. Reading and Northern 1541 and 1540 are both EMD MP15 DCs, both built in 1977 for the Southern Railroad. 1541 was Southern 2353 and 1540 was Southern 2350. Both engines were acquired by the railroad in 2016 and given their vibrant Reading Railroad-inspired paint schemes. On the far opposite track is Reading and Northern 3069 and 3052. Both engines are EMD SD40-2s. 3069 being built in 1978, originally for Conrail as their 6469, and 3052 being built in 1980 for the Missouri Pacific Railroad as their 6072. 3069 was just only acquired this year from Norfolk Southern, Conrail's successor railroad. 3052, on the other hand, has been on the railroad's roster ever since 2003, nearly 2 decades by this point. It was acquired from the Mopac successor railroad, Union Pacific, and also painted in a Reading Railroad-inspired paint scheme. Perhaps 3069 might get the same Reading inspiration in the future. Also sitting in the yard in between both sets of engines is Reading and Northern 5018 and 5019. These two engines will be following the doubleheader all the way up to Jim Thorpe and will help out when needed. We'll also talk about their history a little later. Right behind us, just past the overpass, is another line of locomotives sitting on the siding. While we couldn't see the numbers of the 2 units behind 3055, I believe the engine in the middle is an EMD SD50 and the engine on the rear is another SD40-2. 3055 is also another SD40-2 being built in 1979 for the Union Pacific Railroad as their 3621. It was acquired by the Reading and Northern in 2004. Soon enough, the departure time came and went, and we then heard the unmistakable sound of 2 locomotives working a train up the main line. While the majority of the passenger cars on the day's train were ones used in the first Ramble video, there are some new passenger cars on the day's train. Right behind the baggage car is Reading and Northern 210 Independence and 215 in its Lehigh Gorge Scenic Railroad scheme. Both cars were ex-Reading MU cars, following the same story as 212 from the last excursion. Judging on what 210 has, it looks like the others will receive red with gold trimming in the future, with their own unique names as well. As soon as the excursion left the yard, the crew of 5018 quickly got to work. While they were preparing to pursue the excursion train down the line, we quickly got on the road ourselves. The next place we saw the excursion train at was just north of the Industrial Drive Railroad crossing, just north of West Hamburg, Pennsylvania. While I was dropped off at the Industrial Drive Railroad crossing, I would end up walking up the line almost to where lowland road nearby parallels the line. I wanted to get the train passing this unique bracket post signal. This is probably the most recent bracket post signal made for any railroad across the country, as nowadays most railroads would either use 2 signals or a cantilever signal. After the train passed us here, it then made its station stop in Port Clinton, Pennsylvania. While they were stopped, we took advantage of this and drove to a special spot just north of Molino, Pennsylvania. We are now set up along Summer Valley Road, near where Miller's Crossing Road connects. Here, we get a great shot of the train as it passes by Hawks Mountain. In the background behind Hawks Mountain, I believe we see the Blue Ridge Mountains. The next place we saw the excursion at was along Clamtown Road / Road 443, just southwest of South Tamaqua, PA. Here, the hope was to see the 2 engines charging down the line, but as we're about to see, I should have set up on the other side of the road. After getting back out on the road, the next spot we got a clean shot at was at the Lake Hutto Dam, between Nuscahoning and Hometown, PA. Here, the railroad runs right alongside the shore of Lake Hutto, with a short stretch running right next to the water at the dam. The lake and the dam was created in the 1910s as part of a hydroelectric dam for the Pennsylvania Power and Light Company. A large building used to be here and was served by the Central Railroad of New Jersey. Today, the building is long gone, but some electrical equipment still remains here as part of the power company. Many people were set up here to watch the train go by, not only on the dam, but also out in the water as well. After the train passed here, it then pulled into Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania. But for us, the next place we went to was Jim Thorpe Junction, just west of town. Jim Thorpe Junction is where the Reading and Northern's Reading to Pittston Main Line splits with the branch, the Jim Thorpe. This is also the location where the excursion train will be turned around for the return journey. Last time we were here, the Reading and Northern was installing new signals to control train movements in this area, and now the signal installations appear to be completed. Also, from where we were standing, you could see the St. Joseph's Catholic Church in Jim Thorpe. Many people made the trek through the woods from US Route 209 just to watch the train make its turnaround, but before that could happen, we first saw Reading and Northern 5018 and 5019 rolled past us on their way to Jim Thorpe. .5018 and 5019 will be assisting the excursion train as they turn around. A little bit after the SD-50s passed, we then saw the Lehigh Gorge Scenic Excursion as it backed across the Lehigh Gorge Trail Bridge. The train was being pushed by the railroad's F9A and F7B units, Reading and Northern 270 and 275. These engines were famous for pulling Norfolk Southern's executive train before coming here. A little bit after 270 and 275 pushed through the junction, 5018 and 5019 then pulled the excursion train down the line, with 425 and 2102 on the rear. While we are here, let's talk about the last two new passenger cars on the day's excursion train. On the rear of the excursion train, we have two new observation cars, Reading and Northern 30, the Glen Oanoke Falls, and Reading and Northern number 1, Black Diamond. Unfortunately, for Glen Oanoke Falls, all the information I was able to find on this car was on a post made on trainorders.com. According to the post, number 30 was built by the Pullman Standard Company in 1917 for the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad. It was built as a suburban subscription club car, and didn't even have an observation deck on board. Eventually, it ended up in the hands of NJ Transit and was then sold to the Reading and Northern either in 1984 or 85. Once on the R&M property, It was then given its observation deck, and later, in 2021, was rebuilt into what we see now. If I got any of the information wrong, or have missed some information about this car, please let me know in the comments down below. With the excursion train on the other side of the Y now, we got to see 2102 and 425 feed the train across the Lehigh River Bridge. With the 2102 and 425 facing railroad south, 5018 and 5019 then led the train back into Jim Thorpe. Fortunately for Reading and Northern number 1, Black Diamond, the info I have on it comes from the Reading and Northern's own website. Black Diamond was built in 1889 for Jay Gould as a gift for his daughter Helen. Jay Gould was one of those robber barons of the 18th century. He is best well known for his battle against Cornelius Vanderbilt for control over the Erie Railroad. He was also known for having control of the Union Pacific, the Missouri Pacific, and the Texas Pacific Railroads during his time. After many years of service, the car was acquired by the Reading and Northern in 1996. It is now the railroad's flagship passenger car, being used to entertain important guests, and is usually the last car whenever the Reading and Northern runs their office car special. With the train now turned around, we'll now head in to Jim Thorpe. After we had some lunch, we went straight to the depot. Sitting by the old C&J depot, Black Diamond, Munch Chunk Club, and the Glen Oak Falls were left by the depot. The rest of the train was pulled further down the branch, just out of town. As for 2102 and 425, after getting refueled, both engines were displayed near the depot. With both engines now at a standstill, let's talk about their history. Beginning with the 425, this engine is a Class G1 462 Light Pacific, built in 1928 by the Baldwin Locomotive Works in Philadelphia. It was one of two G1 Pacifics built for the Gulf Mobile and Northern Railroad to pull their unnamed night passenger trains between Jackson, Tennessee and Mobile, Alabama. Later, when the Gulf Mobile and Northern became the Gulf Mobile and Ohio Railroad, 425 was renumbered to 580. Sadly, by 1950, 580 was retired by the GM&O, but luckily for 580, it was then acquired by Paulson Spence to operate on his Louisiana Eastern Railroad. Once on the LE, the engine was renumbered to number 4 and operated pulling passenger and freight trains across the railroad. Spence was trying to create a unique shortline railroad where instead of using diesels, his railroad would still use steam. Sadly, in 1961, Spence died, and shortly thereafter, the Louisiana Eastern collapsed. Luck would strike again for number 4, as it was then sold in 1962 to the Valley Forge Scenic Railroad, where it was renumbered to its original number 425. After some time on that railroad, it was then sold again in 1970 to the Wilmington and Western Railroad, but it never operated on their railroad due to its high axle load. In 1983, it was then sold one more time to the Blue Mountain and Reading Railroad, which would later become the present-day Reading, Blue Mountain, and Northern Railroad. Between 1983 and 1996, 425, along with 2102, pulled many excursions on the railroad. When 1996 came, the 425 was retired, but in 2008, the engine made a grand return. As of the making of this video, 425 is now undergoing a mandatory 1472 day inspection and is getting an overhaul. While we were looking at the Pacific, Reading and Northern 270 and 275 then pushed past us again as they made their way to the Jim Thorpe depot. Next to 425, 2102 was displayed. To give a quick recap, 2102 was originally built in 1925 by Baldwin, originally as an I-10A Class 280 consolidation. It was originally numbered 2044 for the Reading Railroad. During World War II, 2044 was then rebuilt at the Reading's Reading Shops in Reading, PA, as a T1 484 Northern, renumbered to 2102. It served the Reading Railroad well until it was retired in 1956. It was then sold to Carpenter Steel Corporation to be a stationary boiler for their plant, but in 1960 it was then sold back to the Reading, where it later participated in the Reading's famed Iron Horse Rambles. By 1965, the Rambles came to an end, and 2102 then bounced around from owner to owner, pulling many excursions across the Midwest and Northeast until it was sold in 1985 to today's Reading and Northern Railroad. It pulled many excursions until it was retired again in 1991, and it wouldn't steam again until early 2022 when the engine made its triumphant return to service. Sitting at the depot, taking on passengers, was Reading, Blue Mountain and Northern 270 and 275. During this ramble, both engines were assigned to pull the railroad's Lehigh Gorge Scenic Excursion. 270 is an EMD F9A, built in 1952 for the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad as their 937, and 275 is an EMD F7B, built in 1950 for the Chicago Great Western Railroad as their 113D. As I said earlier, both engines were famous for being Norfolk Southern's main locomotives to pull their executive train. They served this purpose well until they were sold off in late 2019 to the Reading and Northern Railroad and given their present paint scheme. After doing some more exploring, it was then time for the Lehigh Gorge Scenic train to depart, so we set up to watch the classic F units pull out of town towards the Lehigh Gorge. As soon as the Lehigh Gorge train left, 2102 and 425 began to move simultaneously, making for some memorizing shots. Both engines were heading back to their train, as it was almost time for the photo run-by. While the engines were getting ready, everyone else scouted out their spots, eagerly waiting for the photo run-by to begin. Soon it was time, and we got to watch as the two engines charged right through town. Once the photo run-by was done, the train then returned back to the depot to pick up its passengers. While they were doing that, we then got back to our car and drove out of town to our next spot in Nuskehoning, Pennsylvania. Here, we got set up at the famed Nuskehoning Tunnel. This short tunnel carries Hunter Street over the tracks and acts as a road access for the Nuskehoning sewer treatment plant. This was the go-to spot on the chase, as everyone was trying to fit in this narrow valley. Before the doubleheader could roll on through, we first saw Reading and Northern 5018 and 5019 charging through the tunnel and upgrade. Soon, we all heard in the distance the sounds of 2 steam engines charging up the hill. So we all got quiet and settled in to watch the spectacular show unfold before us. After the tunnel, the next place we saw the train at was at the Marion Avenue Railroad crossing outside of hometown PA. When the doubleheader left Jim Thorpe, the train was climbing uphill. West of this railroad crossing on the Reading and Northern is Hawks Junction, which is the highest point on the railroad between Jim Thorpe and Reading. From our viewing point, we can see the train finishing its run across the hometown viaduct.
They're still on the move, by the way.
It'll now tackle the nearly 2.5% grade up to the crossing, which is the top of this hill here. Now, for the people who might be wearing headphones, prepare your eardrums. It's going to get really loud. After cresting the grade, we then drove just south of this crossing to the State Road Railroad crossing in the small community of Barnesville, PA, just west of hometown. After Barnesville, the next place we saw the train at was along Railroad Street in New Ringgold, Pennsylvania. Just like in the morning, this town, along with many others throughout the day, was flooded yet again by rail fans and onlookers eagerly awaiting the doubleheader to roll through town. This was the last place we saw 2102 and 425. After New Ringgold, we then drove to the Broad Street Railroad crossing in Port Clinton, Pennsylvania. Just north of the railroad crossing, both steam engines were disconnected from the excursion train. They then pulled off the main line and into the engine shops, finishing a great day of running. But the train still needs to get to the station in Port Clinton and Reading, so Reading and Northern 5018 and 5019 will now connect to the excursion train and take it the rest of the way. While they are getting ready, let's talk about the history of these two locomotives. 5018 and 5019 are both EMD SD50s. 5018 was built in 1983 for the Seaboard system as their 8507, and 5019 was built a year later for the Seaboard as their 8550. Both engines continued to work for their successor railroad, CSX, until they were sold off in 2019 to the Reading and Northern Railroad. After getting coupled up, both engines then pulled the train across the railroad crossing and onto the station. Once the train got to the station, we leapfrogged ahead and got set up along Lowland Road north of Hamburg. After seeing the train here, we then finish our chase back at the Reading Outer Station in Reading. Set up next to the tower here was one of the Reading and Northern's boxcars advertising their freight business to Canada. Since CPKC still has trackage rights over Norfolk Southern to get to Scranton and other points in Pennsylvania, it is very easy for the Reading and Northern to interchange with them. Soon enough, we heard the sounds of EMD engines in the distance and got set up to watch the excursion train pull in. With the train now at the station, this brings an end to our second adventure on the Reading, Blue Mountain, and Northern Railroad. As I said, as of the release of this video, Reading and Northern 425 is currently undergoing a rebuild, but will be returning to the main line once the rebuild is finished. As for 2102, it is still in operation. If you wish to ride behind 2102 or 425 when its restoration is done, you can go check out the Reading, Blue Mountain, and Northern's passenger website. They also have a Facebook page and Instagram as well, so you can keep up with any news related to the passenger services they run here. I'll leave a link down in the description box below so you guys can go check that out. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed this second adventure on the Reading, Blue Mountain, and Northern Railroad. We're sure to come back here and see what other things they hopefully do in the future. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. See you later.